Star Walker Studios presents Game Master's Journey, your multi-dimensional RPG podcast. One of the best parts of being a game master is creating your own world. The 5th edition of D&D has inspired me to finally take the plunge. Today, I set off again on the Obsidian Monolith to discuss my new D&D world, Primordia. I've begun running a campaign in the world, so I'll discuss the first session. I'll also talk about why I think starting small with your world building is the way to go, and some more about my deities. So join me on the journey. Together, we can become game masters truly worthy of the title. Hello, listener. Welcome to Game Master's Journey, your multi-dimensional RPG podcast. I'm your host, Lex Starwalker, and I'm transmitting to you today from the Obsidian Monolith outside time and space. So this is going to be, I guess, one of my unplugged episodes because I am actually homesick with the flu today. And I'm just bored to tears, and I hate feeling like I'm not accomplishing anything in an entire day. So I thought, hey, I'll try to record something for Game Master's Journey, and I'll talk about Primordia some more. This is something that I can do in my addled state, I think. I think that the fever is low enough that I can still be somewhat coherent. I just thought I'd try this, and maybe it'll suck and I won't release it, but I need something to do to take my mind off of how crappy I feel. So I've been building this world, Primordia. It's kind of funny because I started these world building episodes back when I was still living in Indiana, and it was basically because I'd read the Dungeon Master's Guide, and the beginning of the Dungeon Master's Guide is all about world building, and it just really inspired me. And I've never made my own world. I always just kind of used the Forgotten Realms or used Kryn and kind of did my own thing with it. But still, it was kind of like DMing with the training wheels on, you know. And I've always wanted to create my own world, and I've always admired DMs who had their own worlds and always thought that was really cool. Just never done it, just never took the plunge. And I was reading the new DMG, and it was really inspiring me. And I thought, I want to do this. So way back then in Fort Wayne, I started writing down ideas. And what's funny is, I worked on it for a while, and then I started thinking, maybe I'll just run in Forgotten Realms because it's easier, And then I moved, and since I moved, I haven't been really playing much D&D. I've been playing more Star Wars, but I don't know. The bug got in my ear again to think about world building, and it's funny now that I've come back to it. I'm almost completely doing different things than what I came up with earlier in Fort Wayne. So if you listen to the world building episodes 1 through 4, I think, a lot of those ideas I've either gotten rid of entirely, or I put them on a back burner and maybe someday I'll do something like that. For instance, the ideas I was having with the mystery cults, I still really like that idea, and I think that's something that someday I want to do something with. But that's kind of complicated, and it's going to probably involve coming up with some mechanics and some different ways to deal with clerics and other divine casters. Again, not changing anything that's already there as far as how clerics work, but adding more layers on top of it. And, that kind of stuff, it just takes a lot of time and a lot of thought. And I was in this position where I wanted to start running D&D again, but I wanted to do my own thing. I didn't want to go back to Tyranny of Dragons, and I talked with my group about it, and they didn't really want to go back to Tyranny of Dragons right now anyway, either. And I kind of wanted to run my own adventures. So I was like, I can either run in the realms or I can run in my own world. Obviously there's other options, but those were the two I was kind of looking at. And it's funny, I actually decided before I got the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide that I wasn't going to run into realms and I was going to do my own thing. But I think if I hadn't made that decision already, reading through the Sorkos Adventurer's Guide, I think would have further pushed me into doing my own thing and not using the realms, which is ironic. It's like now I have a book with all this information about the realms, and it makes me not want to run into realms, which is actually the opposite of what I was afraid would happen. I was afraid I'd get that and I'd totally not want to do my world anymore and just be like, oh, I'll just run into realms. This is easier. But I just feel like the realms is a mess. And I think it started with 3rd edition. Whenever the Time of Troubles thing started, I think that was 3rd edition. Maybe it was 2nd. I'm not sure. But I feel like at that point, things really started to go downhill and it just snowballed. You know, the Time of Troubles kind of screwed things up a bit. And then we had whatever the 4th edition thing was that the Spell Plague? I don't know. And that screwed things up even worse. And every time we're like advancing the timeline. And now, you know, they're trying to quote unquote fix it with 5th edition. And I do think it's better than it was in like 4th edition, but it's still not as good as it was in like 1st edition. And unfortunately, I don't have, you know, the gray box. If I did, I would just use that probably if I was going to do the realms, and I just ignore everything after that. Yeah, it's just a mess. And it's just, I just don't like it. I just don't like what they've done with it. I don't like all the gods. I don't like, there's just been too many people with their hands in that pie. And I think the realms as imagined by Ed Greenwood was an awesome thing. And I wish that Ed Greenwood could, I don't think he can, unfortunately. I wish that he could publish his own Forgotten Realms, you know, like this is the realms as I run it at my table, ignoring all the things that Wizards has, and maybe even TSR has done to it that I didn't like, right? Like, I think that would be an awesome campaign setting, but the realms as we have it today, I have zero interest in it. So yeah, that's kind of funny. So just a few weeks ago, I started thinking about my world again, and the ideas have just been flowing, and I'm really excited about it, and I'm really happy with the state that it's in right now, and I'm really happy that even though I have so little nailed down, that I'm actually running a campaign in my world now, and I'm creating it as I go. And now that I've tried doing it this way, I can't imagine building a world another way. I mean, I guess I'm kind of using the micro to macro approach. In the DMG, they talk about how there's kind of 2 general ways to look at building your world. And, you know, the way that I always tried to do it before, and the way it seems like people used to do it, and some people still do, but I think, you know, go back a decade or two, and this was the way that almost everybody did it, was the macro to micro, where you start out and you come up with, you know, the continents on your world and the countries on your world and all the cultures and all the cities, and you come up with a multi-thousand-year timeline and all these pantheon and all this stuff. Like you do all this world building, and then you're like, okay, I'm ready to start running adventures in this world. And I'm doing the opposite, which I think in the DMG they call the micro to macro approach, where I'm starting really small, literally with a single city. And, you know, I've thought a little bit about what's around the city and what's going on in the city. But other than that, like, I don't know. I don't even know how many continents are on my world, because honestly, it doesn't matter. Like, how does that even matter, right? All that matters is what the players need to know for any given game session. And anything I've got beyond that is kind of, I don't know if I'd say it's a waste, but it's not necessary, right? So why put off running my game for weeks and weeks or months and months? Why come up with a bunch of stuff that's not necessary? I'm really happy about that. And the nice thing is running adventures in my world, like, keeps me engaged with it and keeps me wanting to create more, where I feel like if I was just world building and not running any adventures, I could get burnt out, which I think is actually maybe what happened before when I first started thinking about making my own world a few months ago. So I've already talked quite a bit about it in the last 2 world building episodes. So, you know, you can go there if you want to get caught up, numbers 5 and 6, I think. So I've run one session. Well, I've run like half a session. So I got together with my players last week, and it was kind of a session 0, but it was kind of half session 0 and half session 1, because we'd been talking on our Roll20 forum a lot about the campaign and about people's characters. So when we started the actual session last Thursday, most of the players pretty much had their characters nailed down. I had one player that didn't really have anything, but the other players pretty much had everything. And I think some of them didn't actually have the character sheet on Roll20 filled out, but they had like a paper sheet or something, and they'd figured everything out. It was just a thing of filling in the fields on Roll20. And we had a 4-hour session, so about an hour and a half in, like, they were ready. And one of the things I did with this campaign is I started everybody at 2nd level, because if I had all new players, especially if they were people that I'd never played with, and or people that didn't really have experience with 5th edition or have experience with role-playing in general, I would totally start at 1st level. But these guys, we've done Tyranny of Dragons together, and just the way this system works is I kind of feel like you're not really your class until 2nd or sometimes even 3rd level, when you can pick your archetype and everything like that. And so I thought, well, if I start at 2nd level, they can kind of, they can have their archetype. They're a little less squishy. And the other thing is I decided the way I was going to do this particular campaign, and I've talked about this before, I think, is go through the monster manual, and for each challenge rating, pick the monsters that I think are the coolest and the most interesting and use those, and then come up with a story to make all that fit together and make sense. So that, say we get this campaign all the way to 20th level, by then I've experimented with every monster in the monster manual that I'm at all interested in doing anything with. And so as part of preparing for that, and I'm going to be releasing an episode soon where I talk about how I prepared for the first session. As part of preparing for that, I went through the list of monsters by challenge rating and picked out the ones that I liked. So when I looked at the CR1 monsters, there just weren't that many that were terribly interesting to be like a boss encounter or something. You know what I mean? And the way the challenge works in 5th edition is you're not supposed to throw a monster at your players that is a challenge rating higher than their level. Right. So if I start out with level 1 characters, then the toughest thing I should throw at them is a CR1 creature. And there are some cool CR1 creatures and below, but they're not like something I would like. I was looking for, this monster would be a cool encounter all by itself, right? CR1 and below, you have a lot of stuff that can be cool in groups or with other monsters and stuff like that. But as far as like a monster that can be a cool encounter all by itself, there aren't that many. Now you get to CR2, Challenge 2, and there's a lot of them, or a few anyway, enough to get PCs from 2nd to 3rd level. So for those reasons, I was like, I'm just going to start at level 2. And I lost my train of thought. I don't remember where I was going with that. Maybe it'll come to me. As you're all like shouting at me, I wish I could hear you as you're telling me what my point was, because I'm sure you know. Oh man. But anyway, so people had their characters made, and I think I know where I was going with this. What I was originally planning is I wanted everyone, all the PCs, to already know each other and basically have already adventured together, and kind of using the idea from Fate, which I don't remember what it's called, but where during character creation, each player, like on a note card, writes down like an adventure they had before, and then everybody passes their note card to the next player, and then that player reads the person's little story about their first adventure, and then they add some way that their character was involved with that. So I wanted to do something like that with this group to explain like how you guys got from level 1 to level 2. And also so that we can just hit the ground running with the campaign and we don't have to worry about the, how are we going to get these characters together, or now the characters have to get to know each other. We can just say, okay, you guys have worked together at least once before as a group, and that explains how you got from first to second level. And I was going to, as part of session 0, have everybody kind of figure out, well, what was that first adventure? What did we do? And how did that go? To kind of build up some more backstory for each character individually and for the group as a whole. But one of the players was missing and couldn't be there that night. So I was like, well, I'll wait to do that until next week so all the players are here. And people were kind of like wanting to play, So then it turned out that once we decided, okay, we're going to start, well, then the missing player showed up. So I guess we could have done the first adventure thing. But the plan right now is to do that this week. But I'm not sure. I think I might actually skip it because I kind of ended the last session on a cliffhanger. And I personally would rather just go on with the adventure than work on more backstory stuff. So I think what I'm going to do is just tell the players, hey, someday in the future, we're going to talk about this first adventure. So if this is something you guys want to talk about, maybe when we're on break during a session or on the forums in between sessions or whatever, that's awesome. Or, sometime when we have time, we'll talk about it as a group. But, it's still something I want to figure out to add to the history of the party. But at this point, now that we're going, I'd rather just keep going, So yeah, I think we played about an hour and a half, 2 hours, which was enough time to kind of get things started. They got their first adventure, their first quest, if you will, went to the location and had 2 or 3 encounters. And so, yeah, and the first adventure is just a tiny little dungeon that I did, and I actually used the random dungeon creator in the back of the Dungeon Master Guide, and I sort of used it. Kind of what I did is I used it for ideas. So I started, I'd make a chamber and roll to see how many exits there are in the next chamber. But each time, if I had like some idea of what I wanted to do, like that would trump just rolling randomly, right? And then once I had the whole thing done, kind of using a combination of random and what I felt like doing, it was kind of weird looking because part of it was random, and it's like, yeah, I don't see how or why someone would build something like this. So then I kind of changed it and made it like more symmetrical and made the rooms so they were about the same size and stuff like that, just so it looked more like something that an insane person didn't build. But yeah, it was a lot of fun doing that. And that's a great way to get started. If you want to build a dungeon and you're just kind of stuck what to do, definitely check out the random dungeon tables in the back of the book. There's a lot back there. It's really cool. So the reason I ended up doing that is, and I talk a bit about this in the episode I'm going to release about creating the actual encounters. I had this list of monsters. So I went through the CR2 monsters. I picked my favorites. And then, I figured out, I think it was 5 or 6 that I could throw at them before they would hit level 3. So then I was like, okay, what are the 5 or 6 that are the best of the best? And then, a lot of those, they just had common themes. And I was like, it'd be really easy to put these all in a dungeon and it would work really well. And ended up having this kind of Halloween-y theme to it with undead and aberrations and lots of scary stuff. So that's the adventure. So I thought one thing I could tell you is the player characters in the group. And before I forget, I should also remind you that I'm live streaming these games. So if you want to see us play in my world of Primordia, I live stream that every Thursday at 3:30 Pacific time. That's 6:30 Eastern time. If you're in another time zone, then I'm sure you can figure it out what your time is on YouTube. So if you go to youtube.com/user/Starwalker Studios, that's my YouTube channel, and it will be there live at those times on Thursday. And then what I do is I take that video and I edit it. I cut it up into about hour-long sections. I cut out all the non-relevant conversation, or at least most of it, and then I put those up later on YouTube, like forever. So, you can see it live on Thursdays. If you want to see like all the joking around out of character and stuff like that, you can see that in the live stream on Thursdays. Or, if you can't do it on Thursday or you don't want to see all the extraneous stuff, you can watch them anytime later on YouTube, and then those will be edited and in smaller sections. So here's the players and their characters. So first of all, I have a player named Kyle, and he's actually pretty new to role-playing. When we started Tyranny of Dragons, it was either his first or one of his first role-playing experiences. And he really took to it, and he does a great job with it. And I believe he's run some stuff on his own as a game master himself since then, which is awesome. So his character is named Sprout, and he is a Goliath cleric of the nature domain, and his deity is the goddess Primordia, which I think I'll talk a little bit about the deities here in a few minutes. So that's his character. And then we have Dwayne, who is playing Yorick, the tiefling sorcerer, and he's a wild magic sorcerer. We've got Steve playing Wraith, an Eladrin fighter wizard, and he is doing the Blade Singer arcane tradition from the new Sword Coast Adventurer Guide. Chrissy is playing Azrael, an Aasimar warlock, and her patron is the Great Old One. And Nathan is playing Samson, a human scion. I refuse to call it mystic, and he is Order of the Immortal. So you see here that I'm letting them use some playtest stuff. So, we've got Kyle is playing, well, actually that's not playtest. He's playing a Goliath from the Elemental Evil Player's Companion. Steve is playing an Eladrin, which is from the DMG, which is an optional subrace for Elf. Chrissy is playing an Aasimar, which is also from the DMG, which is an optional subrace. And then Nathan is playing the Scion, the Psionicist, or as Wizards seems to want to call it, Mystic, which I just think is a terrible name. Mystic is like a shaman, arcane magic user, or maybe a divine caster, but I just don't see Mystic being a Scion or Psionicist. So that's playtest. And yeah, why the hell not? And I just made a post for the players today on our forum where I went through all of the Unearthed Arcana articles and decided which things I would let people do in the future. Just because, like I said to them, I think player options are a great way to customize your world and make your world different from other campaign worlds. And again, like I've talked about before, I don't want to remove options that players already have from the player's handbook, but I'm happy to add more options. So I added pretty much everything from the Sword Coast Adventures Guide, and if there's anything people want to do that's kind of Forgotten Realms specific, then I'll make sure to reflavor it so it fits my world. But for instance, the Arcana, God, if I could talk, the Arcana domain for clerics from that book is perfect for my world. It's perfect. And then, Unearthed Arcana, I went through and picked all the stuff that I thought would fit well in my world. And it's playtest stuff. But, I just told them, I'm like, hey, this stuff is playtest. So if you play this, just understand that, it's like beta or alpha or whatever. So it may change. And if you're okay with that, and you're okay with Wizards coming along at some point and changing the way your character works, or me coming along at some point and changing the way your character works, then awesome. You're welcome to play test it, and we can kind of see how this works. But just, be aware, if you're going to get really attached to how, your class or mechanics work, and you're going to be upset if that changes at some point, then, maybe you don't want to play a playtest thing, right? So yeah, that's the characters. So I do have a player, Kyle is playing a cleric. So I wanted to have a little bit more on my deities for him. And this is probably the one area that's just changed so much from when I first started thinking about my world. I started out, I was going to use the elven deities from Forgotten Realms that I liked. I was going to use dwarven deities from Forgotten Realms that I liked, dragon deities. And then for human deities, I was going to use kind of analogs to various Greek deities from Homeric times. And, part of that was I wanted to limit the number of deities, because the number of Forgotten Realms, if I just use everything, it's just ridiculous. It's stupid. But even with that, I still had like 20 some deities or something, which is way too many. So I've talked about on here how I recently decided I wanted to try to have my gods correspond with like the suns of Primordia and the world itself and the moons and the planets and stuff like that, just how we did in olden times here on Earth. And I kind of like that. So, and I'm still going to try to do that, but I had to come up with some deities, right? Because I want someone to play cleric. So I kind of went back and forth, different ideas. And a big problem with 5th edition is the lack of domains for clerics. There really aren't enough domains, especially if you're talking about a world like Forgotten Realms, where you've got dozens upon dozens upon dozens of deities, and yet you've got like 8 domains or something for them to share. Like, they all get pretty samey pretty quick, and their clerics are pretty samey pretty quick when they've all got the same domains. So I was looking in the Dungeon Master Guide for, assistance on creating a pantheon. And one thing that they suggested is just having a deity for each domain. And so I counted the domains, and let's see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 domains. And that is counting the death domain from the DMG and the Arcana domain from the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide. So at that point, I had kind of sketched out kind of what gods I thought I should have, just based like God of Death and God of War and stuff like that. And I think at that point I had like 10. So I was like, in 3rd edition or Pathfinder, where we have lots and lots of domains to choose from, it's really cool having deities have like 2 domains or sometimes even 3 domains or even more, depending on what game you're playing. Because like, I like that. Like, for instance, if we have a deity with the life and light domain, and obviously a cleric can only have one. So you have, this deity has clerics with life domain, and this deity has clerics with light domain. And maybe, those are actually like 2 different factions within the religion or something. And they even have slightly different beliefs or things like that. And I thought that was cool. But unfortunately, that doesn't work with 5th edition because there's just not enough domains. And if you start giving gods more than one domain, they all kind of become the same, right? And that's the problem. So I thought, well, at least for now, until either Wizards gives us more domains or I take it upon myself to create more myself, I think a better way to handle it right now is just to say, okay, each god is associated with a single domain, and that's it. And that gives me a manageable number of gods, and as far as mechanics, it's really all I need because all my domains are covered. So that's what I did is I listed out the 9 domains, and then I just came up with a god to fit each domain. And I'm actually really happy with how this turned out because it forced me to have, because I could only have 9, it forced me to have gods with kind of broader portfolios, so one issue I have with the Forgotten Realms gods is, it's just all over. It's just a mess. Like, you can tell it's been created by numerous people who a lot of times probably weren't even communicating with one another, because, you'll have gods like Corellon, who's, if you look at like the 5e sources, it's pretty limited. But if you go look at Corellon on like the Forgotten Realms wiki and you look at his portfolio, like, it's ridiculous. Like, he's got everything from magic to war to music or poetry or what. Like, he's got all this stuff that's like not at all related in his portfolio. And then you have other deities who have like a really, really specific portfolio. Like I said recently on the show, we've got a god of death and a god of the dead. I mean, how stupid is that? Why is that not just one god who's the god of death and god of the dead? It's like, well, I'm a god of this if it's a verb, and he's a god of that if it's a noun kind of thing. Well, not really, but you see what I'm saying. Like, it's just ridiculous. So by only being able to have 9 deities, it forced me to, if I'm going to try to cover everything that you'd have a god of, to like have them have more things in their portfolio, but still have them be related, which is what I was going for. So that's what I did. And I'm going to share what I came up with you. Now, a lot of these names are kind of placeholders. I have one god. Yeah. Primordia, my goddess of nature, is the only one that's actually that's my name that I came up with. That was easy because it's named after the planet. The other ones are either they're a name from some other god that I just like took the name just to have a name. But once I have really clear ideas of who these gods are, I'll come up with my own names. So first of all, we have the death domain. So I went ahead and called, for now, my god of the death domain Hades, god of death. And that's it, because I don't see the need to say god of death, the dead, things that are nearly dead, things that were recently dead, like death. If it's got to do with death, that's his area, right? Next is the knowledge domain, and I went ahead and went with the the name Ioun for this. I mean, I know there's other knowledge deities that I could have used a name for, but I like Ioun because we have like Ioun stones in the game. So that one I might actually keep as the name just because it fits well, because there's things named after Ioun in the game, which is kind of cool. So Ioun is the goddess of knowledge, obviously knowledge domain, but also civilization, history, trade, crafting, and culture. So I kind of pulled some ideas from Athena here, because in Homeric times, Athena was kind of the goddess of the city-state and the goddess of kind of civilization and stuff like that. So I thought it made sense to have, knowledge, civilization, history, trade, crafting, and culture all under this god of knowledge. I thought that made sense. And the one maybe that you might be like, what about, is maybe trade. But when goods are traded, knowledge is traded as well, right? And in a world like a fantasy world, it's going to tend to be some of your more knowledgeable people are going to be traders, because unlike a lot of people, they actually travel to other places. So I think it makes sense. Next, we have the life domain. So I decided to call my life deity Hanali after the elven goddess. And so Hanali is the goddess of love, fertility, beauty, pleasure, healing, and protection. And yeah, I just thought that made sense because, life, what says life more than, love and fertility, procreation, pleasure, healing to preserve life, and protection to preserve life. So I thought that made sense. Light domain, I'm going to call this guy Corellon for now, but a bit different from normal Corellon because my Corellon is the god of time, fate, and longevity. Next, we have nature domain, and this is my goddess Primordia, goddess of nature, and that's nature in its creative aspect. Animals, plants, agriculture, and hunting. So again, instead of having a god of hunting and a separate god of agriculture, like you see in a lot of pantheons, I've got them together under nature because all that stuff fits under nature. Animals, plants, agriculture, hunting, nature. Next, tempest domain. Here we have the god Talos, god of nature in its destructive aspect, storms, forest fires, earthquakes, tornadoes, destruction, and that's pretty much taken from Talos from the Forgotten Realms. Personally, if I were designing my own pantheon, I would have this under nature. Like, this is just another part of nature, right? Again, we're splitting things up that don't really need to be split up. But since we have a separate domain for Tempest, and I'm trying to have each domain associated with one god. I was like, all right, we'll go with it. So we've got kind of the more creative nature deity and the more destructive nature deity. So it works. And next we have the Trickery Domain. And this is another one I made up my own name for, Inara the Trickster. And I thought it would be fun. Actually, my wife helped me come up with this idea. I thought it would be fun to have my trickster deity be female. Oh, and something I should mention, all of my deities have basically as many aspects as there are people to think about them or perceive them. And I talk about this on an earlier episode, but basically the same deity will appear differently to different people because that deity appears as the person expects them to appear. So, I'm saying Primordia, the nature goddess, is female, and Talos, the tempest or storm god, is male, but that's just the way they're most commonly seen. So there might be people that see Primordia as male. There might be people that see Talos as female, or even whole cultures. But just to avoid confusion, I'm going to keep the names the same, even though they would probably have different names for the gods, right? But just to keep things simple, I'm going to keep the names the same. And, it kind of, I guess, makes sense because names have power, right? And these are real. They're not like fictitious deities like we have in our world. They're real beings that have real names. So, they might get annoyed if people call them by a different name. So I could see the gods cracking down on that and saying, no, my name is Primordia. I don't care if you see me as a male, and I'm more than happy to appear as a male to you, but my name is Primordia. Don't fuck with that. All right, trickery. Okay, so I thought it would be fun to have my trickster god seen as female just because usually they're male. And so just mixing it up a little bit. So Inara the Trickster is the goddess of deceit, luck, mischief, celebration, drinking, arts, and manipulation. So some things might seem a little weird. I think the celebration and drinking, I mean, if you have a god that's kind of the trickster or the prankster, it makes sense that is also the god that would be into like partying down and stuff and having a good time. As far as the arts, I'm kind of thinking, because this is the goddess of deceit and manipulation, if you think about it, pretty much any form of art is either deceiving the senses in some way or manipulating them in some way, right? So if you think about like a painting is deceiving or manipulating your senses into thinking that this two-dimensional thing is actually three-dimensional, like that kind of. So that's kind of where I'm coming from the arts. That could also easily be with the knowledge domain with Ioun. But I'm seeing my knowledge deity is more bookish, where art tends to be more experiential, right? Which again kind of fits in with my trickster goddess being, also associated with celebration and drinking and stuff like that. So yeah, it makes sense to me. Next, we have the War Domain, and this is just another name from Forgotten Realms. Tempest, god of war, conflict, ambition, competition, battle, martial arts, and honorable combat. And the reason I have all this, and it's not just god of war, which is what I might have originally done, just like god of death, and it's like, well, that explains it, is because one of my players, Steve, made a really good point where in my world, the cities are connected by portals, and people don't really travel in conventional ways between the cities. Does it really make sense that there would be very many wars? And no, it doesn't really. And so why would you have a god of war if there's not really wars, right? So that's why I included things like conflict, ambition, competition, martial arts, honorable combat, like dueling, that kind of thing is all covered. So, he's not, the war part of him, his war aspect is not as prominent as it used to be because there's not many wars anymore, or even any. And then finally, our last domain is Arcana. And this is Sehanine, my goddess of magic and creation. So you notice that my god of creation is god of magic. So that says something about my world, right? And as far as the celestial bodies that these are associated with, I don't have them all figured out yet, But what I'm thinking right now is I have two suns. I have a blue sun and a red sun. And I am thinking that the blue sun is associated with light, who is Corellon, god of time, fate, and longevity. And then the red sun is associated with Arcana, Sehanine, goddess of magic and creation. So, if you think about from kind of an astronomical perspective, right? Okay, we associate the gods with things like planets and moons and the suns. From that perspective, what are the most powerful, most influential gods, right? Well, it'd probably be the two gods of the two suns and the god of the earth, or Primordia itself, right? Those would be the three most powerful gods in the pantheon. And so I wanted that to match up with what I see as the most powerful gods as far as their portfolios. So in my world, the most powerful gods are the god of light, Corellon, also god of time, fate, and longevity, and is the blue sun god. The god of Arcana, Sehanine, goddess of magic and creation, which is the red sun god. And then the god of nature, Primordia, goddess of animals, plants, agriculture, and hunting. And that's I always say earth goddess, right? Because we know what that means, but it's not, right? It's Primordia goddess. I'm still not sure what I'm going to do with my moons. I originally had an idea of the moons being associated with the schools of magic and or being associated with deities. And I thought, well, maybe I have a deity for each school of magic. But again, we start getting into way too many deities. I thought, well, maybe each school of magic could be associated with other things. So maybe like the god of necromancy is also the god of death. But then all my gods are tied to moons, and you have things like the suns and the planets that don't have gods associated with them or whatever. So I don't know what I'm going to do. What I'm thinking right now is I might not have the moons associated with gods at all and just have them associated with the schools of magic. So the gods are the two suns, the planet Primordia, and then the other planets in the system for the rest of my gods, right? So right now I've got 9 gods. So we've got 2 suns and the planet, that takes up 3 of them. So I'd have 6 other planets in the system that are the other 6 gods, and then just have the 8 moons, 1 for each school of magic. So I might do something like that. And then maybe what I could do, because one idea I've been kicking around is having a very small, like 8 or 9 or 10, or maybe, a few more, but like say around 9 actual true gods, but then having demigods that don't, they don't grant spells. They're demigods as understood in 5th edition. They can't grant spells. They're not true gods, but they're, either like a titan kind of thing that was created by the gods, or a demigod could be an offspring of 2 gods, or it could be an offspring of a god and a mortal. So I thought maybe I could have a demigod associated with each of the schools of magic, and they're just really, really powerful wizards or spellcasters that have achieved immortality. So they're not true deities, they don't have clerics, they don't grant spells, but they're immortal demigods that are associated with each of that. And if I did that, of course, the demigod of necromancy would have to be a lich. I mean, obviously, right? So I don't know. It's an idea I'm kicking around. So there are my deities. All right, well, that's going to wrap up episode 62 of Game Master's Journey. Be sure to tune in to episode 63, where I will have the second part of this discussion about my world of Primordia. If you would like to reach me, you can email me at gamemastersjourney@gmail.com. You can follow me on Google+, just search for Lex Starwalker, and you can follow me on Twitter at Lex Starwalker. Please visit my website, starwalkerstudios.com, where you can find the show notes for this and all the Game Master's Journey episodes. And you can also find my other podcasts there. If you would like to support the show and help me keep it going, a great way to do so is to become a patron of the show. You can find out more about that by clicking the Patreon button in the show notes, or just head to patreon.com/StarWalkerStudios. I hope that you have a chance to play your favorite RPG this week, and I hope you get a chance to try some world building of your own. I'll be back soon with another episode of Game Master's Journey. Until then, game on.
This has been a Starwalker Studios production, your source for quality gaming and hobby podcasts.
This episode's music provided by Cloudwalker, Renfield, Transboy, and Ish. Please see the show notes for more details at starwalkerstudios.com/GameMastersJourney.